DCX Sonic 2. It starts by having the bad guy of the story say the same thing he said at the end of the last issue, wasting my time and trying to get the brownie points of the reference twice. Having that line that explained what a Chaos Emerald is was just redundant last issue, where a character already explained what the emeralds were. Already the issue's off to a boring start where I'm forced to repeat myself about problems to not half-ass this. I have to remind you because it's a problem in this issue too, and the major plot hole of the story is that there's no way Sonic and Flash would have been stupid enough to stop here because they're supposed to be cool. The Flash would keep running and punch him into the ocean while also stopping on a dime. And even if he couldn't, one of their allies who they know is coming here would save them from the ocean anyways. Even if you assume that Sonic can't stop on a dime, so if you just ran into him and punched him into the ocean because he's faster than the Flash in this crossover, the momentum would send him into it too. Because the games have him full of momentum. Even though Sonic 4 and the Rush games proved that it might not have been canon to his powers and instead just a gameplay mechanic. I'd expect the Flash to be able to stop as fast as he can run, as he isn't a video game character. And isn't the whole appeal of the Flash that he can do literally anything fast? That include making the effort to stop because thanks to the Speed Force, physics don't apply to him, which is why he doesn't get injured every time he stops or slows down too fast. Also, logically Flash would have learned how to swim, because since he keeps getting into dangerous situations and there's a variety of places he goes to, he'd inevitably be under the water. He'd need hydrophobia to justify not knowing how to swim at this point then. And if Flash canonically doesn't know how to swim, that's still a plot hole since no one in his position would be that stupid and have lived this long in it. I wouldn't know if he can't swim. I never said I was an expert on any of these overrated superheroes. I have read that Flash is actually faster than Sonic. Actually, why did Sonic take longer to stop then? The fact that Sonic's ahead of Flash implies that he's faster than him once again. But like I pointed out with text on the screen last issue, which is something I do constantly in my reviews, DC crossovers are never canon to the source material of either, so this isn't even canon Flash. So he's alternate universe Flash anyways. It's still not ideal to depict him wrong, but only if it annoys most of his fans. And I've heard DC fans usually aren't aware of this crossover, and the few that had low enough standards to read this of course liked it anyways, so it ended up not mattering. Sonic didn't skid that far ahead when he tried to stomp, but he still did. But the distance he skidded ahead was only the amount covered by a few of his shoes lined up in front of him. So if he ran into Darkseid, he might get to skid to a stop in time not to go off the cliff. Why does he have to skid to a stop at all? He runs at the speed of sound as it is. He would realistically do a lot more skidding than that. So it's obvious that he has a required secondary power that prevents that and keeps him from getting injured from slowing down too fast. At that point it's arbitrary that he can't stop instantly like an AOSTH. And he can't stop instantly in the games by stopping. But it's also arbitrary that he can go fast at all because it's never explained why any Sonic character has the specific powers they do and not other ones, so that's believable. It's just a forgivable nitpick on top of the shit pie that is this scene, which had no right to progress the way it does, with these two speedsters uselessly standing still and talking beside Darkseid, who is polite enough not to take action against people he would have heard. Instead of being cool, Sonic asks if this is the guy, when it doesn't matter right now. Ramming him into the ocean to make him drop the emerald would be a win no matter who he is. Just the evil way he looks, in a way that no other person Sonic's ever seen does, means he's gonna think he's worth attacking in case he's a supervillain. And so what if the emerald falls into the ocean? Someone could dive to get it back, or Tails could send a robot or submarine after it, with it being safe from Eggman the whole time. My hand's sore and I'm only on the first page. Flash says that's Darkseid, and the comic just has to get in a dig against Eggman by saying he's not as bad as him, which we already understood when we were told that Darkseid conquered a bunch of planets. So that wasted my time as well, since any tension that would have built up gets destroyed when Sonic says he likes a challenge. Unless we're intended to think he's an idiot. And we know Darkseid's gonna end up leaving this universe anyways because of the heroes at the end of the crossover. And he probably won't get to do anything super evil because it's family friendly, and even if he does, it'll be undone by time travel or the universe resetting. They run up to Darkseid while saying an obvious plan in front of him they should have gone over with each other earlier. And Flash grabs the emerald, and physics is completely ignored because the writer makes it so that Sonic homing attacking Darkseid's back doesn't move him 1 inch ahead, even though he doesn't have a force field on and hasn't had his feet buried in the ground. Buildings have foundations below them for a reason. They have basements for a reason. The sheer momentum of Flash running at him and grabbing the emeralds would have caused him to move with them. The writer wrote himself into such a corner that he had to force a Diabolos Ex Machina to force the obvious thing to not happen. This is something nobody with any understanding of how reality works and how Sonic and Flash's powers affect things could have possibly predicted. So it goes without saying that it's not my fault I didn't anticipate this exactly happening. I wasn't trying to predict what would happen. I did assume they'd never be written to run at him and attack him when he was still right next to the cliff, because that would have led to this bullshit writing. I know if Darkseid was smacked into the ocean, it'd make a fool out of a character he should and has to take seriously, but that's why he shouldn't have been standing at the edge of the cliff and been near some fast people. That was my point. And if this is how Darkseid normally is, then that's bullshit writing for superhero fiction in general because it makes no sense. Even swap bots could get knocked around. It doesn't matter if something's invincible because it can still be moved by a force smacking into it. Rick Sanchez put up a force field over himself in a comic issue, but the force field still got smacked, and that still sent the force field smacking into a wall. I don't care how heavy Darkseid is. If he was that heavy, he wouldn't be able to walk around because he would have to carry his own weight. Only magic would have this be possible, and this guy's been associated with just science so far. Buildings are really heavy, and they still get flattened by tornadoes going against them. The writer chooses to humiliate the supposedly cool heroes by having Flash get grabbed and thrown into Sonic, and shows even more favoritism by having one of them instantly say run, after all of their experience, like this never happened to either of them before. It is good that Flash said hell. I'm glad they were allowed to get away with that in a Sonic comic. It's something superhero fiction nowadays gets away with. So it's in character for the Flash, and in some countries, hell isn't even a swear at all. Why won't one of them consider making a tornado lift him by running around him? That's what Archie Sonic did with tons of robots in his first issue, and the whole reason Sonic's faster than Flash this crossover might be that he's based on Archie Sonic. They end up having to run away from lasers from his eyes. Somehow they don't get to just run back the way they came in a straight line and leave the place instantly. The panel after this doesn't tell me why. I don't really know which Sonic I'm supposed to look at first, and the only one that looks like he's running in a straight line looks like he's behind the laser and to the side of it, while heading for nothing. Unless the head of this future Sonic is hiding some future laser that he could have jumped over anyway. But somehow, instead of them just jumping over any lasers and fleeing, they come up with a plan, which Sonic needs someone else to come up with because it makes total sense that the protagonist of a platformer didn't think to jump. Something he did in the comics too. Flash says to come at him and go hunt, so two lasers hit each other and they get sent backwards by a shockwave and are slightly burned. Especially Flash. I found out by reading a YouTube comment that these are actually supposed to be like Omega lasers that erase people from existence. So they're literally magic. So then why do they create a shockwave when they hit each other? They're just a magic spell. They would just cancel each other out and then disappear. There's no heat and energy to be generated. Why would you have Omega lasers instead of just regular lasers? Like, of course, a regular laser would also kill anybody that it hits. Why even go to all this extra effort? He underestimates the two of them. Then Darkseid activates a portal, and Sonic somehow is stupid enough to think Darkseid's a jerk for not killing him. This just points out a plot hole instead of simply not writing a plot like this at all. Instead of an epic fight scene involving a bunch of characters, things have already ended. I assume the jerk remark means that he left without saying a word because he's so confident and disrespectful. But it'd be much more disrespectful for him to at least insult them, like Sonic would do. He's motivated by sadism, so there's no way he wouldn't kill them while they're vulnerable here. So the writer wrote himself into a corner and had to use another idiot ball to save them. Why did Flash think he could do anything against him? He's been with the Justice League for some time, and their main enemy's been Darkseid, so Flash should have already learned not to bother attacking him, unless he only recently had this magical invincibility spell cast on him. I guess by Scarlet Witch. But I only assumed that because I've seen video reviews like Linkara's. It should explain why a factor into the plot progression happens for everyone to get it. Flash calls his friends to tell them what happened while I assume sounding tired because the shockwave was so hot he's overheated, since there's no reason they'd be physically exhausted from running. He taunts them like a bully that Sonic and totally not him wasn't fast enough to stop him, which must be just to taunt him because clearly running speed had nothing to do with their failure. So he should have pointed that out, and he hasn't known him long enough to smile while calling him out on his unlikable insult. Speaking of fast enough, maybe Flash is right in the sense that if they had started running to the Emerald earlier instead of listening to worthless exposition, they would have gotten it in time. But nobody takes responsibility for this or thinks in their heads that it was their fault for stopping to take a chit-chat when Darkseid was loose. Which further encourages me to not care about any of these characters and their boring repetitive exposition that they haven't found anything in their searches. Then why are they even talking about it? There's an insultingly worthless scene that is the villain scene, which is always just an excuse to tell us things twice while having no enjoyable characters either. Although what wouldn't be told twice would be that out of nowhere, the Emeralds are trying to hide from the villains instead of being located effortlessly. Rouge's Emerald radar worked for her no problem when she was working for Eggman. I guess this is to insult Eggman, to say that Darkseid is so much scarier than him that the Emeralds are hiding from him. There's padding, and I wonder why the artist had Cyborg stare directly at the audience, because that never happens when the story isn't trying to break the fourth wall. So it's just amateurish from how distracting it is. After boredom, Tails says he's got the locations of the Emeralds. You'd think the guy who made a fake emerald wouldn't take so long to track down the energy of the emeralds when he would have had plenty of free time before this adventure to start making that technology. He had an emerald radar on a Riders game in Sonic 3. That was only mentioned in the Japanese manual, so only the Japanese and the nerdies of nerds know that, so you can't expect anyone else to. Those radars could have been broken with the last one being broken very recently, but that should have been explained. Anyways, what happens next is predictable and as unengaging as before. Cyborg confuses me by saying that he's sending the heroes to the emeralds closest to them, even though they're the ones that do the actual moving. Stupid dialogue. Flash continues his unlikable bragging, and Sonic talks as if his own speed can't be measured, which is weird for someone named Sonic, and ignores that his speed does get measured in Sonic Unleashed. But to be fair, that's in the visuals of gameplay being totally metatextual for all we know. I'm a firm believer that gameplay is canon in a video game series, but I'm talking about a number on the screen that doesn't get used by the player for solving puzzles to progress, not exact abilities. So it could have just been done to impress the audience. Also, I read a YouTube comment that picosecond is an exaggeration. It's easy to explain as Flash is just bragging though. If he isn't just bragging because it's a different universe Flash from the real one, then that means that this Sonic is even more fast in comparison to him. So after the assholes are done talking, there's boring talking for a while, so I'm just desperate for it to end just from glancing at its panels. Which I think every time I see a panel with nothing happening and characters with no personality. Batman asks for a backup plan and doesn't get one right away, making Superman look stupid. But Wonder Woman looks smart by agreeing with Batman. and Cyborg says he's got an emergency way to return to the Watchtower right away. So this prematurely makes me wonder if the heroes are going to use it eventually. A great writer would have thought it would also be good to have the only reason for bringing this up be that it makes Cyborg look smart, because making a main character competent is worth it in and of itself. But this is a writer who's been all about making his main characters incompetent for plot progression his entire career. So it's very likely that he's gonna somehow have them fail to get all the emeralds. The only thing good I can think of about giving away the plot early is that if the comic gets prematurely cancelled, at least we'll know what'll happen next. But it could just tell people that anyways on social media. It's worth it to not have everybody know. Just don't spoil the plot so that some people won't have any reason left to buy the rest of the issues. Then Green Lantern has such a negative attitude that he says that they couldn't evacuate the planet, because he thinks they'll have to do that. This only gave me pause because I know in the meta sense that we'll never see the whole planet actually needing evacuation in a kids' comic meant for only 5 issues, unless they're gonna do it with time travel. He asks if they can do any better than that, as if he's surprised at how ineffective his team is in that way. As if he hasn't been a member of the Justice League. It should be Silver asking this question. Superman again looks stupid in how overconfident he is against someone invincible when I was already told they'll fail. And I'd rather like seeing my favorite traditional superhero, not be punished every time I look forward to his dialogue. I said traditional because every dictionary I've looked up has the word superhero be defined in a way that even Sonic and his friends could fall under it. It's not about having a cape and a secret identity in a costume anymore. Even with 3 super speedy characters going to pick up and carry to safety everybody in a tiny time frame, where are they going to take them all to without huge spaceships or interdimensional portals? And also, it takes a very long time to pack up all of your belongings. Sure hope they're going to help with that afterwards, because separating a person from their belongings is a traumatizing dick move. I wish these characters would actually talk to each other like people. None of them asked how in the world these speedy people failed to get an emerald. None of them show frustration at them and get an explanation and then apologize. And if it's because they already know that Darkseid can't be knocked over, then again, why did Flash even bother? Then the story thankfully takes a break from all the dialogue to do silent visual storytelling, with each panel for a while showing the various supervillains against each separate team. I assume the characters are just fighting in the way they always do anyways, and they don't do anything that hasn't happened in Sonic before. So this is all as creatively bankrupt as crossovers by definition are. They just shouldn't be around because of that. And I've got no reason to be invested in any of these tensionless panels since there's no characters without plot armor in any of these panels that would need protection. So there would be no loss if I didn't see the whole fight. Then there's more boring dialogue. It's weird to me to see the name Steppenwolf since that was already used by Penders. Why are Shadow and Batman doing nothing against him so that he can do this talking? Why doesn't Shadow teleport him so that he's stuck under the ground, or at least ram him off the bridge? He resorts to typical punches again. Why is it that while Sonic did the homing attacks because that's like the games, they keep up the trend with Shadow where he resorts to boring melee attacks like he's Knuckles? Even though if he's this arrogant because he's the ultimate life form, then he would be using the most dignified offensive abilities that are associated with him. So the Sonic character gets called pathetic, nothing new there, and says he was just a distraction and uses chaos control. I'd be a lot happier with this if I didn't assume that it was Batman's plan instead of the writer finally understanding that he should be smart. Batman compliments and gets told that I use chaos control to stop time. I like that he said that instead of I use chaos control. That's the name of my ability to stop time, which would stupidly suggest that all he can ever do with chaos control is stop time, even though the final boss fight between him and Sonic in FC2 debunked that with their voice clips. I'm glad the fight was ended with Shadow being competent like you might be able to predict if you had faith in the writer, and I was still surprised by the result, because it was the third thing I'd expect. Shadow actually thinking to use his chaos control has become so rare that I wonder if Flynn was mandated to do so here. there's a rumble and blue lights appear all over the places where the heroes are. This villain's really crossing into villain Sue territory. Why even read a story involving him if he's too powerful? He's just gonna humiliate the characters that you want to see be competent. Just skip to the part where he loses. It's too depressing to never see the heroes do victories that matter. Shadows doesn't matter because he didn't kill this guy, I assume. Because for no reason Batman assumed he didn't kill him, or else he would have lectured him. Darkseid states the obvious and says space and time is warping. He says with just this one he could mutilate this world, which is overpowered nonsense. So the word just should have been a red flag to the writer. And this is how it was in Archie, where one measly emerald powered a machine that rebooted the universe. Maybe I wouldn't find this so hard to believe if it weren't for the fact that I know about the Master Emerald, which makes the Chaos Emerald to look small by comparison, so I prefer the Master Emerald to be used for something so powerful. It is a magic gem, so why couldn't it mutilate several universes? But it would have been impressive to see the bad guy have to do a lot more to earn this kind of power instead of just taking a leisurely walk to one emerald that was conveniently out in the open on the grass. We didn't even get to see him do a special stage. It'd be better for him to have to get all the emeralds in a difficult way. He didn't even try when succeeding against his enemies. Why are these people even working for him anyways? I guess he pays really well, and they all assume that he's gonna fail. Batman tells his friends they're out of time within the span of one issue, surprisingly. Well, fast pacing's better than boring pacing, and I was already bored by this pacing as it was. I'll take anything for this crossover to end faster. So eventually, Superman says they'll all need a way to reach the Ragnarok. And confusingly, Tails says he doesn't have anything because his fleet of planes can't handle that kind of approach. He seriously never built any aircraft that could get to a Death Egg on its own, after all the times the heroes had to go to space? I have to assume he did, but Eggman wrecked it recently. And also, what fleet? It's awesome of Tails that he was competent enough off screen to have built a fleet. That's more competence than he gets in the games. So, this isn't even bad, because it's more respectful to a major part of the source material than the source material. It's fine to contradict one thing about source material in the name of being respectful to a more important part of it if fans like that. But the story should actually show the Tails fleet then, because it'd be cooler to see than read about. Eventually Sonic proposes the idea that they could hitch a ride in the egg carrier, so there's more boring talking, with Eggman talking more than he has to get his points across. Flash guesses that Eggman is Sonic's nemesis, but while he is right, I just have to assume that what he's basing that on is the fact that Eggman wasn't with Sonic to help him all along. But just because he wasn't at Sonic's picnic and didn't happen to be where the minion attacks were to defend people, doesn't necessarily prove that he isn't an ally of Sonic. Tails uses technology too, and he's an ally of Sonic. So for all he knew, Eggman could have been another Tails who was just busy somewhere else. Like Wave. So there's some more dialogue that's insanely boring from how predictable and lifeless it feels. I wish there was something else in all of this. Of course Lex Luthor is referenced, it'd be weird not to, but the issue still sucks. Eggman says that because he sees Darkseid as a worse threat, he'll give the heroes a ride to him and leave it all to them. It makes sense that he'd see them as more capable of being a supervillain than his robots, because robots always failed against people like that who were fighting a supervillain. And so it's smart of him if he's not even gonna risk sending his robots there too. It feels weird to have the Eggman team up in the second issue. Weird doesn't necessarily mean bad though. It's more like it's demeaning to him, that we didn't even get to see him try against Darkseid, even though his whole character since day one has been that he's arrogant, and if he was capable of accepting that, then he wouldn't have been able to win against a tougher force. He would have stopped fighting Sonic and left to start his empire on another planet. This is the guy who tried to use an egg carrier to take on Perfect Chaos. He has no idea that Darkseid's planning on damaging the world. Maybe it's assuming he wants to take over the world, but he was given no indication that that'd affect him, someone who's already a fugitive from the current leaders of the world. Or he could assume he wants to use the Emerald to power stuff, And again, he has no way of knowing that inconvenience him. Maybe he should be assuming that he's gonna kill the heroes for him, and then he could go fight him. Eggman has the ability to make emerald radars, as Sonic Adventure 2 proved. But since Darkseid took an emerald, the only reason it makes sense for him to do this is he wants to get the emeralds too, but was beat to it. So we should have seen him trying to get that emerald on the Eggmobile and have it proven to him that Darkseid gets the emeralds too fast because he can portal away. So maybe he portals to them. The point is, if he had to call Darkseid a threat with no reason to know that, I wouldn't have ranted. It's smart to have the pacing fast at first in the crossover to skip to what's supposed to be the most exciting part of it, so that most of the crossover's issues are the good part. It's probably executive meddling, but it's a surprisingly brilliant, subversive move on the part of the executives. At least it would be if you assume that it's because the executives know that this crossover sucks, and so they want to get done as fast as possible. Flash smartly doesn't trust Eggman and gets told that they can, and he stands to lose as much as the rest of them. That as much is just the Chaos Emerald. But the way he phrases it implies that he thinks Eggman magically knows Darkseid's motive. Thankfully, the pacing is fast when it immediately cuts to the egg carrier flying towards Darkseid's flying base, avoiding lasers that curve out of one. Which I guess is a new thing for Sonic. And even though it crashes into it, creating a hot explosion, all of the heroes emerge from it just fine. Why waste time having Wonder Woman say she'll fight Eggman after Darkseid? We're all smart enough to know she won't, and it'll just disappoint any idiot expecting her to stay here after the crossover. Amy fawns over her even though I haven't been shown Amy seeing her do anything cool. I just have to assume she showed super strength in the fight they had against the bad guy. Of course she would've, but it's less emotionally impactful and it's harder to take a character seriously when they fawn over another character if we haven't seen why they would. There's just a bunch of boring dialogue after this with nothing happening. All of it is so boring that even small text bubbles feel like they drag out forever because no sentence is interesting. Logically, the speedsters are told to search for Darkseid, and logically Flash finds it instantly. And he points out they did so faster than Sonic. And I have to hope I'm supposed to think Sonic is wrong that he just got lucky and went the other way than him. I find it cringy to see Flash say cope, because I only saw that way of talking on the internet. So I didn't think anyone talked like that in person, risking getting punched for it. But I don't know. Flash isn't even a teenager, right? So what's the point of having him use slang that minors use? It makes sense for Sonic because he's always been meant to be cool and hip. If I were to argue this means the series should have to keep using modern slang, it'd look dated later. So maybe the series should avoid the kind of slang that becomes dated to not lose its identity, but also stay timeless. But then since we can't see the future to learn what slang would become outdated, it'd have to use no slang for that. And how can you have a cool cast of non-adults relatively talk like actual cool non-adults without using any slang? Ultimately, this means the Sonic cast should use modern slang, but just only do it occasionally. And the less traditionally cool the character's supposed to be, the less slang they should use. Anyways, it's cathartic that Flash calls Sonic Little Man. It's good of Darkseid to say he'll give their world credit for being stubborn. It's not outright nice, because I doubt the heroes appreciate this, but it is mature to be able to admit what's good about your enemies instead of just endlessly demonizing them like a toxic fanboy. It's also smart of him to try to attack his enemies without taking the effort and time in turning around to face speedsters. It's a bit overpowered that he can have his eye lasers turn around and go over him to aim at people behind him though. Not that overpowered, but it seems villain Sue-ish again. Superman takes a laser hit for them, and somehow he screams when I'd expect Mr. Bulletproof to be immune to getting hurt by lasers, and he has to be getting hurt or he wouldn't be in pain. I thought he was invincible. Also, I read a YouTube comment that his Omega lasers that he shoots out from his eyes are supposed to erase you from existence upon contact. Well, clearly he's not using those lasers here, or Superman would be gone. So what an idiot. There's no reason for him not to use Omega lasers against literally everybody. Unless they're really energy exhaustive. And he only has a very limited amount of them. But that wasn't established. He calls the heroes slow, even though it makes sense that they want to rush over to the guy who effortlessly dealt with them last time they tried things. So what were they supposed to do? Idiot. The two stay truce to each other because they were being competitive, even though they were always still on the same side, and were never competitive in a way that distracted from their mission. So there's no reason it would go on to do that, but if it did, that would have created more conflict and tension, but also been frustratingly unlikable of them, so good. But they're unlikable already, and it would have made a more interesting story than just the heroes try to hit Darkseid whenever not dodging him, which I guess is all that the fight will be. Batman says the hero should neutralize the device. What device? How does he know about any device? Why didn't he go over this plan with them while they were on the way here? Darkseid would have hit him while he was saying this. Why didn't he try to shoot lasers at the heroes while they were saying those things before this to shut them up because he thinks they're talking what's annoying? He says they should keep him distracted with a fight, but never specifies who takes the emeralds, which he should have gone over with them on the ride here. What if all of them tried to and just rammed into each other? Logically, all of them would fight instead of trying to go for the emeralds. And now for the fight, which is unengaging because it's about nothing but characters with invincible plot armor against an invincible villain. Eventually he's tied up and taunted, and at some point Shadow uses Chaos Control, but nothing happens. Darkseid talking after this means he wasn't stopped in time, because villains sue creators' pet favoritism. He just says he was told about Chaos Control and the promise of that power lured him here, and Shadow says impossible. And I don't know whether it's about his immunity to time stopping or the idea that he could use Chaos Control. Well, he already portaled to a place and that's also Chaos Control. Why does Shadow doubt that he could do that too? He already was able to use an emerald individually in the sense that he had it glowing. That's already unique. Shadow should interrupt him now that he's talking again because it's obvious all he's gonna do is brag about what they already assumed about him. So why doesn't Shadow just warp Darkseid to under the ground to get stuck under there without the emerald? Or with, they could dig it up. If he could just stand up and use the lasso around him as a whip, then what took him so long? Why embarrass himself for even a little bit by pretending he was weakened? Why doesn't he attack Sonic and Flash while they're stating the obvious and planning a strategy? Sonic would just attack him. Flash goes from saying emeralds aren't his thing to saying that he can go use his power to disrupt the dimensional what's-it, which contradicted himself. Sonic calmly attacks a bad guy, and there's more boring dialogue as Flash explains that he intangibled himself to get to a place, and continues to explain to just the audience what he plans instead of thinking it, like Mike Gallagher wrote this. Flash gets protected by Silver and Green Lantern, and there's a lot of boring exposition that explains that Flash is wasting his time, and Cyborg is talking in a confusing way to fail to explain it away. Why would the dimensional energies being out of sync matter? There are different dimensions because they have different atomic vibrational frequencies, according to Archie. So why would the energies be in sync? Darkseid is relatable to me by saying enough and shockwaves people away. Cyborg wonders if the universe is going to collapse because it's got the ability to read spikes in certain particles, which would only be believable if he had been given a reason to think it'd come in handy much earlier. Who cares? This will all be undone anyway. And why would this even happen if Darkseid didn't want it to? Darkseid has a reason to not freak out because he thinks he could use the emerald on his own to bend time and space back to his will without being the ultimate life form or Sonic. He gets grabbed, and Sonic and his own friends get force field protected in a flying green bubble as Batman says boring dialogue and mentions the boom tube. He says he's putting his faith in them. If one of them actually thought it was hopeless to stop Darkseid, then it would be completely unacceptable that only the Sonic characters were trapped in a force field and sent away, instead of everybody here. Just leave Superman here. So they get sent to someone I don't know, so there can be even more boring talking I'm desperate to get done. The guy just states the obvious, and Amy shows morality by wanting to return to help them and gets told they can't go back because supposedly their dimension's gone. I guess it isn't. And then how? How is that machine so incompetent it loses the dimension coordinates just because of an increase in certain particles in one of them? This crossover would definitely be undone with time travel then. A ripoff of Worlds Unite. This is also a ripoff of Pender's idea for a Sonic movie where Mobius got destroyed. The story ends there with him being in a satellite over the Earth. I actually appreciate that ending kinda because then I could get shown what this version of Earth is like through the eyes of characters I actually care about. Also, there's the obvious problem of there being no interactions between the superhero characters and the Sonic characters, at least next issue. The thing is, the Sonic characters were only interacting with the superheroes that they were like. You weren't seeing Sonic characters clash with characters that they were nothing like. Because realistically, they were all on the same side against Darkseid. You're not missing out on anything new. Oh no, Sonic doesn't get to compete with Flash again. That didn't get old immediately. This boring issue by Ian Flynn not only forces Sonic and Flash to fail to stop Darkseid from getting away, because with no explanation for new readers, Darkseid can't be moved by them attacking him at supersonic speed. Yet he can walk around despite how heavy he'd have to be for that. But the story actually goes on to have the heroes have to use Eggman as a free taxi service to get to Darkseid's Death Egg, only for the Sonic characters to have to be sent to another dimension, thinking their own one was lost in the pointless fight. I guess I am glad the pacing is so rushed. I thought they'd spend the next few issues looking for emeralds and showing entire fight scenes over them. And I'd be like, who cares? But I was like that the whole issue anyways. The dialogue's extremely boring almost any time it happens, and so is the action because they all have plot armor. And I don't see any creativity in the story. The only thing positive about this that's major is that the pacing's so fast. And that's only because the crossover is boring, so I want it to end quickly. And every page that its plot progression takes up is agonizing to me. If it wasn't so boring, it should have had more issues to avoid feeling rushed, because a story like this needs to be a little longer. People aren't thinking about it before saying that it should have had more issues. They're just talking in hypothetical about an imaginary version of this crossover that's good. But with this writing, I just remember how long Worlds Unite and Collide were, and wonder how I got so lucky as to have this be only 5 issues long. You don't want to have to suffer through as many issues of this as Worlds Collide had.